Well, muchas gracias, mi amigos. This week, the Vinyl Guide is brought to you by the Groove Washer, the best damn record cleaner on the market today. Ask your local record shop for the Groove Washer. Plus, check out the Groove Guard record sleeves, the best protection for your record collection. It's groovewasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10. And here, type this in your browser now, audiophileUSA.com. Over 42,000 used records online, searchable by title, author, genre, record label, and more. And audiophileUSA.com only has excellent and near-mint records, even some mint ones that are still sealed. Load up your cart with the best used records around. That's audiophileUSA.com. And with that, on with the show. Well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 337 of the Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And man, we've got an amazing guest talking records today, Mr. Jack Irons. Now, you may know Jack from his time with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Pearl Jam, 11, and more. And today he's going to talk all about his amazing career, as well as his new solo LP, Koi Fish in Space, which is available on vinyl and streaming services right now. Today with Jack, we're going to talk all about the infancy of the Chili Peppers, those first gigs, the early punk shows. We even talk about the origin of the Cocksock, playing with What Is This, connecting with Pearl Jam, introducing them to Eddie Vedder, and more. Plus, we also dive deep into Koi Fish in Space, Dream of Luminous Blue, and this new music Jack is making is phenomenal. Plus, he's got a new video for the track, Epic Battle of the Elements. I encourage everyone to check it out. And again, Jack Irons, Koi Fish in Space, available at record shops everywhere. And by the way, if you love Jack, and why wouldn't you, there is an extended version of this interview up at patreon.com/vinylguide. If you like our show and you want to hear more, plus help keep the Vinyl Guide podcast going, head over to patreon.com/vinylguide and do your part. We give away extra stuff at patreon.com/vinylguide, extended interviews, early and ad-free episodes, occasional freebies and giveaways, plus you get the warm, fuzzy feeling of helping support this show. That's patreon.com/vinylguide. Go there now and enjoy the extras. And finally, there are over 300 more episodes of the Vinyl Guide podcast you can enjoy anytime on your podcast app. Simply subscribe for free to the Vinyl Guide on your smartphone, and you can enjoy other episodes like John Dwyer of the OC's episode 331 of the Vinyl Guide, Ambrose Kenny Smith of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, episode 325, the 420 King himself, Tommy Chong, episode 320 of the Vinyl Guide, Al Jorgensen of Ministry, episode 302, Amel and the Sniffers, episode 301, Fred Armisen of Saturday Night Live in Portlandia, episode 289, and literally hundreds more. Subscribe to the Vinyl Guide podcast, scroll, download, listen, and enjoy. All right, with the upfronts done, let's get into our conversation with Mr. Jack Irons. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this week on the show, we've got ourselves Jack Irons, whose name likely graces many albums in your collection. Former member of Red Hot Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam, but also a solo artist in his own right, and has a new album, or a double EP, I think is probably the right way to say it, Koi Fish in Space. So welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you much.
Is it an album? Is it a double EP? How would you describe Koi Fish in Space?
I would say a double EP. It's two recording process done at different times that were an EP I did in 2019, I think, which is the side 2, which is called Dream of Luminous Blue. Mm-hmm. And then the Koi Fish in Space was recorded in 2020. I think the way that works for me is that, an EP's worth of material is sort of where my energy rises and falls. Doing it all myself and sort of, I'm trying to pull sounds from the air practically, just starting with drums. And, that sounds like a lot of fun, but it can also be pretty, like I'm possessed to finish it, but there's times I'm going, this isn't fun, I don't have a real direction. I'm looking for the direction, trying everything. So, it depends how much I like that process. So the EP, it's like 5 or 6 things. If I'm doing 9 or 10 things, it's like, this could take a year, so That's why I like the EP. I get it going. I get hot on it for a few months. I finish it. And so when it came to working with ORG and doing an album, I certainly like the idea.
Mm-hmm.
I also think on that note, it makes my music easier to listen to a little bit, because it is so no vocals. It's a lot of abstraction. So like, it's easier to listen to 6 things than it is 10 things. That's the way I find it.
Right. Well, look, an album is a big commitment, and there could be tracks that maybe you're not entirely convinced are good, or maybe there are tracks that just kind of you finish because you feel you have to, or maybe you don't even have time to do it. Whereas a single that may go by way too quick, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny when you listen, the amount of time it takes to make something versus listen back is always interesting concept. When you're in it and you're doing it over and over again, and you're looking for finishing touches that could take the longest time, it just seems like, wow, like that really put so much into it, and then, at the end of the day, when you get away from everything, I think any artist could say that, and then you hear back your, 4 or 5 minutes or whatever, you're listening to that over tea or someone talking to you or whatever people got to do things in the world. It's, It's an interesting concept, I would say.
Okay. Now I definitely want to talk more about this project, because I've been listening to it over and over again, and I still have more listens to go through, and I do want to explore this quite a bit more, as well as the video. The video I thought was absolutely gorgeous. I just stumbled upon that last night. So throughout your career, you've spent some time with some amazing songwriters: Neil Young, Joe Strummer, obviously the bands you were part of. What did you learn from those artists about songwriting? And then what do you feel that is something that is organically yours you've developed through that?
Well, they're real songwriters. So, like, I don't consider myself a songwriter. A song has this sense of chords and melody, lyrics. To me, that's like how I hear it. I mean, so if I'm considering a song, I've worked with enough people to know that, the guy writing a song, he could be, on a piano or guitar quietly in his house, no band members, no nothing around, right? He could be anywhere, and all of a sudden the melody and the chords and lyrics come, and, they can, songwriters can hone it in there way before, like, as a drummer, I'd ever get a chance to hear it. And as a drummer, being honest, the more together a song is with vocals and melody, the easier it is for me to just play along and find the right parts. So, my stuff is, it's like I said, it's complete abstraction. I've been doing this actually. Look, I stopped playing in Pearl Jam in, what was that, 1998, and I haven't done too much band stuff since then. So, I've been doing this solo stuff since about, I think I started around 99. I really started diving in. So it's had this arc, of how I do it now versus how I do it then. So, but everything always starts with the drums in me, it's very rare that I can't even recall one of my things that didn't start with the drums. So, how that process starts is, early on, I would actually sit. So what you asked me, what did I take from working with those sort of, big time songwriters? And I think the main thing that I took that I'm capable of taking is a sense of arrangement. Knowing when something should go somewhere else, when you maybe are staying, you're extending your stay on this kind of part too long. In the beginning, I wasn't as good at that. I'll be completely honest. There's some songs on Attention Dimension, my first record, that are like 12 or 12, 13 minutes long. I probably edited them,
Yeah.
Where I was so big on my parts and I was so precious about doing an edit, and that's not fun for the listener. So, but what I took for them is that sense of arrangement, because I think, when you're writing lyrics in a song, there's a way, we've all become sort of accustomed to what sort of popular music sounds like to a degree, so so that's what I took from that, all the working with songwriters. I don't think I took anything else that I could expound on in words, because my process starts with drums. And so in the beginning, I would actually sit around and say, oh, let me come up with some beats, and then go, okay, I like that beat. Then what should follow next? And then I would actually work up actual drum arrangements that had actual, set amount of time, and I felt flowed into one another and could stand on its own. So nothing coming at me. Through the years, I don't do that anymore. I just sort of need something to play to.
Right.
So I've used other stuff. You want me to go into that now?
Well, I mean, you're more than welcome to. I mean, I'm interested. You start with a drum beat and then build on top of that. You start with a concept. Are the songs about anything while they're being formed, since you don't start with lyrics?
I would no. It's really soundscape, for me. So, what I've learned about doing this is, okay, so like where I'm at now, I mean, some of the tracks might be tracks that I've actually recorded for other artists to their songs. You see, like I do it, home studio stuff I've been doing a long time. So, they've given me something inspiring to play to, right? They've given me a song, something I got into, and then, they do their music, they put out the stuff, and then I'm sitting around and have my drum tracks. I might a year later listen back, completely differently and go, oh, that's a cool drum track, right? Like, what can I do with that? And but it has a sense that I played to something that inspired me, right? And it has a sense of arrangement. So I might start working that way. Sometimes I actually play to, I like to practice, and a lot of times I practice to, I don't even know what songs, but I have a list of songs I get into, maybe some Motown stuff, songs I like growing up that give me a certain feel, and you can always listen back and know when you sort of did something good, it had a sense of being a take. That's also something, obviously, I learned doing all the recordings with bands, and the more top artists, you kind of go, oh, that was a take, that wasn't, and you learn to kind of know the difference. So I start there, and then where it goes, that's the interesting part. And sometimes it's, a lot of what you hear that might sound like actual instruments could be drums triggering an effect that all of a sudden I take the sound and then I process it a certain way. I mean, sort of like a mad scientist, I kind of become. It overwhelms me. I might sit at my computer for, 10 or 12 hours, or in my studio, playing with effects. So I couldn't really say exactly how what I do is done. In the beginning, I was doing a lot of different music parts. I get a keyboard, you get samples, you get MIDI, whatever. And I was experimenting for anything I thought that worked, that represented a sound or a melody that I went, okay, that works. I think every musician or artist, that's especially doing experimental stuff, at some point they're doing something and they decide that works for them, that sort of decision process, if you may, and I just, I kind of go till I think it's done, really.
Right. Because, and correct me if maybe this is, not the right viewpoint here, but when a songwriter, like what we just described, a traditional songwriter like a Neil Young, or someone who does those sort of arrangements with verses and choruses, quite often with lyrics that have a point or an emotion that they're trying to convey, when they start to write a song, there's already kind of a bit of a goal there, is to express whatever emotion that is. It sounds like what you're doing, it does have a larger element of experimentation, and the end result, quite a bit of it is a surprise to you, because maybe it's not what you set out and envisioned, but it's a place you arrived at through exploration. Would that be fair?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It would be fair. That would be completely fair. The only thing is that sometimes you need that one main thing. So it might go to places I never thought it would go. Like if you were going to just take, hey, I did this drum track, I like it, it sounds good. Yeah, I have no idea from that point to where, but I need that one main thing usually that carries it, that all of a sudden I go, oh, I like that. Right. And it's going somewhere. And then I can sort of build off it. So, the biggest surprise is getting there, where that goes, as the song gets completed, as the sounds, it's like anything else. I go, okay, that's my main thing. I like it, but it's not done. What do I need to have a sense that it's done, and then, I don't verbally conceptualize much, what I have found and that I tend to gravitate towards sounds, right, that are either spacey or sound like they're underwater kind of sounds. I don't know why that is. I just think maybe it's more interesting sonically. I guess if you look at my personality, it kind of makes sense. I was, the spacey stuff definitely makes sense. So, and I've tattooed my body completely with whales and dolphins when I was into tattooing. So obviously I was once really in love with the ocean in that sense. So, it kind of weirdly makes sense, but it's nothing I have ever thought about, it just, right. It's just something that I think seems to work every time I go, oh, I like that. It has that element.
Now, when it comes to like naming the songs, is that something that comes at the end? Is that something that partway through the song you start to conceptualize what it could be about, or you're getting these visions or ideas? Like how does that come together?
Well, the best way is when you're working on it and something kind of pops in your head about it, that's the best way. So then I actually have a title. I try to, obviously it's a little bit conceptual. So if I don't have any titles, which is often the case, I have to spend a lot of time with it when it's done, listening, trying to, you're putting your sort of attention out there in the mind realm of like, okay, what does this sound like? What is it? What sounds like? What's words that could represent this as a piece of music? And so I try to be as authentic as possible, to say, so that requires me listening and kind of letting go. And sometimes that's hard and maybe not as genuine as when I'm working on it and I'm getting this feel for it. And all of a sudden this title really, sticks with me, it comes to me, and then I can go with it. But, without lyrics always lend themselves to titles. And as you said, songwriters have, they're conveying an emotion. They're trying to deliver a message. That's not, at all where my sort of, inclination to do this comes from. So
getting in the Wayback Machine here, growing up in LA, what was the soundtrack? What were the records that inspired you and kept you going?
I was, most of the what you heard growing up at my time of growing up was on the radio, right? So there was AM and FM radio. So whatever I heard in my parents' cars driving around was probably the bulk of it. I loved hits. I was a Motown guy. I loved Motown hits and I loved the Beatles. I mean, those would be the two biggest influences, until I got into rock, until I got a little older and got into bands like Zeppelin or Kiss or, Aerosmith, whatever the big rock of the 70s was. I was definitely, in on that for being at teenage years. But prior to that, my main influences would have to be sort of the Motown hits of whatever was on the radio, and the Beatles, for sure were my two things that I gravitated towards. And probably, I got my first vinyl, when I could get my own record players and stuff. There was a lot of pop stuff at the time, like TV show pop stuff, right? Like the Osmonds and Partridge Family. I mean, I remember all that, right? Because there was only like 7 TV stations. Sure. Everything had a certain impact when you got to see it. You didn't have a lot of choices. So, but I wasn't as big on that super poppy, they used to call it bubblegum kind of stuff, of the 70s. I wasn't as big on that. Beatles were as pop as I could go. And
was there a song or an album or something that made you feel like, oh, you know what, I want to play. I want to be part of this?
I don't think there was one. I was really into rhythm. The one thing I can say is anything that got me sort of tapping my feet. I used to bang my head a lot in the, like sitting in the car, and I would bang my head on the back seat a lot, to whatever had that kind of groove. So it had to have some groove to it, for sure.
Growing up in LA, you and some of your former bandmates were going to the same high school. I assume you guys were going to punk shows together as well.
Went to a few. I wasn't as the punk. I was. I had a more regular home life. I didn't go out and stay up and do a lot of late night punk partying or whatever that the scene was going until. I probably didn't do that much anyway, but certainly I was going to get to be over 18 before I was doing stuff like that, so I don't know how much, so let's see, we graduated in 1980. That means I was 18. So, punk was well underway before that. But I wasn't probably as aware of it until the early 80s. So, especially when Flea joined Fear, right? So that's kind of the time I felt like the influence was around in my circles, to be aware of it. Most of the people, I'm being honest, like most of the people I knew that were into punk as I went on, in other words, as I got out there and played, I had friends of all ages. I knew people of all ages. So the punk scene, the people that I knew were a bit older than me, so if you knew all the punk of the 70s, New York punk and the LA punk scene in the mid to late 70s, most of the people I knew were older than me, to have kind of got into it.
Did you go to shows at the Starwood? Were you part of that community?
Yeah, Starwood, for sure. But I don't remember seeing punk. I remember, say, Sunday night, they always had a sort of like, under 18 you could get in, or if it was a cheap night, you couldn't even get in the Starwood if you were under 16 or something. You had to have some ID. There was some age requirement. So I remember a lot of times me and some friends of mine wanting to go see things, but we couldn't. We were too young. So I remember Sunday night they always had, so either maybe it was free, that's why we went, or they would let in, a certain age group at that time. And most of that stuff, though, what I remember was a lot more like hard rock. I remember seeing a lot more hard rock type bands available, like on Sunday night at the Starwood. But I definitely was there many Sunday nights for some reason.
Okay.
And then a post Sunday night Winchells, eating donuts with my buddies at 1 a.m, and I wouldn't, if I did that now, it'd be over. But
do they even have Winchells anymore? I remember going to them back.
That's a good question. I don't, I haven't driven around LA in a long time, so I don't know.
So during those years, you had a band with Hillel, Flea, and Anthony, and you would be doing these sort of jam sessions around this time. Is that right?
Well, the way it worked was, so me and Hillel and my good friend, great musician, Alan Johannes, we were the first three to start playing together back in junior high. So in the quick order of things, I met Hillel. We were about, he was going for his 14th or 13th birthday. And we had just sort of started becoming friends in junior high, and he invited me to his birthday party. And I think that was the turning point. I don't remember if that was 13 or 14. It might have been 13. And it was 13. And, we had this immediate sort of connection as people, ages of just like, you're my best friend type of age, and then we realized we both had this love of music. And, so I always wanted to play drums from what I could remember, and he wanted to play guitar. So we decided to take music lessons at a local LA music school. I think it was called Fairfax Music School, or it might have been called Cocksock Music School, and then changed to Fairfax Music School. But we went, it was near his house, and I took drum lessons. He took guitar. And, whatever we learned in the first 6 months, I don't recall. I don't think it was much. And then we hooked up with Alan Johannes, who was also our friend in junior high, but I didn't know him quite well yet. I think Hillel knew him better, and he was already a really good musician. He's a very gifted musician, and so, he was already very adept at singing and playing guitar. So, so we all three started jamming together and writing songs together, and we did that for a long time. We became a band. We called ourselves Anthem at some point. I don't know. There's probably a year or two of playing together where we didn't have a name, just learning stuff and jamming all the time. And then that was junior high. Hooking up with Flea was later. Actually, I've known Flea since elementary school. We went to sixth grade together. And then we all went to the same junior high. But we knew each other, but we all weren't in the same friend group. He was trumpet player in band and stuff. And, but it wasn't until high school that we all started, working together. We were looking for a bass player in Anthem. Now the bass player we were working with wasn't working out. And, we were getting more serious. And I think Hillel, it was probably Hillel. Hillel was becoming good friends with Flea and wanted him to play bass with us. He was a trumpet player, but he picked up the bass to come play with us. And, that's kind of where that started, and then we became Anthem, or were we already Anthem? I don't know. And then so was me, Flea, Hillel, and Alan. And Flea was good friends with Anthony. So, there was all one big sort of circle there, that the band was the four of us and Anthony was our friend. And, that's sort of how those, beginnings happened, friendships and camaraderie and things like that. I think Anthony, he wrote some introductions for us, as a band, he was sort of he helped support Anthem a bit, and things like that. And, so that's sort of that was high school. And then post high school, Anthem changed his name to What Is This? And, we tried to be a band on the LA scene, making it, pretty simple. You try to get gigs, you try to get the record labels to come see you and get a deal. I mean, that was really it. Meanwhile, college was sort of going on for everybody. I think everybody was going to college and stuff. And then, of course, everyone was growing up and, going to clubs and doing whatever, and whatever influences were coming into everyone's life. And punk rock was obviously one of those influences. And Flea got the opportunity to play with Fear. And so he left What Is This? And my guess is 82, 81 or 82, somewhere there. And, so he went off and did that. And I used to go see him, do gigs with Fear when they were in LA or, something like that. I used to love their drummer, Spit Sticks. He was an incredible drummer, really. And What Is This? Got a bass player. We carried on with me and Hillel, Alan, and our bass player, Chris. We didn't meet Chris for a while, so we had a few. We have some good stories about that, but that's yeah. So, we're doing the scene. New wave is coming, right? Everything's coming. At some point in 83, Hillel and Flea and Anthony, they were all in the scene doing things, going out, clubbing, and there was a whole scene happening. I probably wasn't really. I was always there from the point of view of I was going to play with my friends that were on, doing things. I was a homebody, I still am, makes sense. So, at some point there was an opportunity to me, Flea and Hillel and Anthony to do a show together. Like if we could come up with one tune to open up for a friend of ours, at a local club in Hollywood. And so we got excited and said, we'll do it. We didn't rehearse. We had a little get together at somebody's apartment in Hollywood and went over the tune that would become Out in LA. That was the first tune for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and did the gig as, what were we? Tony Flo and
the Miraculously Majestic Masters of Mayhem.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it. So we did it. We did the gig as that. We did the tune, and as I said, it was easy to play with everybody because it was a lot. If you look at the timeline, when we used to play all the time. I mean, rehearsal was important. 4 or 5 days a week. We tried to do gigs one at least. If we didn't have 2 gigs a month, we were bumming out, right? So we had a lot of time spent playing together with Flea and Hillel and Alan. There's a lot of time spent playing. So doing this one show, and Anthony singing, it was pretty easy. We were all good friends, and it was easy to pull off the show, and it went really well. And then, we decided to do one more show, and then we added Get Up and Jump to the lineup, and then that really was the sort of beginnings of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
So much of your formative years were playing with Hillel.
Yeah.
I assume his style deeply influenced yours, and vice versa. Would that be correct?
Yeah, correct.
What can you tell that is still in your playing that is from that original partnership with Hillel?
We'll be back after these messages.
Hey everyone, let me tell you about AudiofileUSA.com. AudiofileUSA.com is a fantastic place to buy used records online. AudiofileUSA.com has a heap of inventory, like tens of thousands of records you could search through online, and they are all excellent and near mint quality. These are your final upgrades, beautiful records that you can enjoy for years to come. AudiofileUSA.com is a family-owned and operated business, and they work hard to find the absolute cleanest records in the world and make them available to you. Head up there now, AudiofileUSA.com, search and dig through their selection and find the deals. Get a box of love on its way to you now from AudiofileUSA.com. Now, I know that you know that the Groove Washer is the best record cleaner in the world, but did you know that Groove Washer now makes archival quality record sleeves too? Yep. The world's best record cleaner is now making some fantastic sleeves and record accessories for a limited time introductory offer. The Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves are absolutely fantastic, so head up there now and try them for yourself. Go to groovewasher.com and use discount code VinylGuide10. That's the Groove Washer record cleaners, record sleeves, and other protection for your record collection. That's groovewasher.com.
Now we return to the program already in progress.
No limits.
So much of your formative years were playing with Hillel. I assume his style deeply influenced yours, and vice versa. Would that be correct?
Yeah, correct.
What can you tell that is still in your playing that is from that original partnership with Hillel?
Well, it was that's a great question. It's a rhythmic exploration. Hillel was a very rhythmic guitar player, and so we always tried best we could to push the boundaries, within having a song that we could play for people and had a structure and whatever influences the songwriters were trying to get across. But we always tried to what can we do with the rhythm that would make it interesting? What can we be different about it? What can we change about it? I was always looking for something slight difference. I wasn't some sort of virtuoso player where I could just, play odd times over things or, do, I didn't have all that sort of wide range of talents. It was always sort of like, well, I'm a rock guy. This is what I do comfortably, but what can I bring that's a little bit different? And I think Hillel and I, and Alan for that matter, we all did. Fleet, we all tried. That was, I think, a big part of our language communication.
Mm-hmm.
Our music language communication.
Mm. When during this time, as you mentioned, people are considering, they're after high school. So some of them are still doing the band. Some of them are trying their hand at college. Do you remember the moment or the time when you realized that music was what you're going to do for a living?
Yeah, I do. I knew that's what we wanted. We all had an idea of it, but college was really the first. I think 3 of us, and I'm not sure which 3, went to Northridge University, and I know I was there a week and I was lost. I knew I didn't want to be there and I didn't want to do it. I remember specifically a specific time where I was in a class and there was supposed to be like a test coming the next day. And I didn't even know what class I was in. I was that far. I couldn't even remember. I was like, oh, I'm done, because I was a good student in high school and I tried hard. And I knew that was it. I'm toast. Like, as soon as I didn't have to do it anymore, I was not going to do it. And I wanted to be a musician. And we all had that same feeling.
Right. So you had to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, in truth, that's true. Looking back on it, I put it this way. If it just seemed like a different time, I wouldn't say that my whole way of doing it is something I would, being a parent now, you kind of, I don't know how to say the right words, but, because all my kids are artists. So, but, I'll put it this way. In life, I was very fortunate. I've had my hard times. I was very fortunate that all these roads connected together. And somehow, all of us have made, a good life to, some better than others, but, in music,
Yeah.
all these years.
And back then, to be fair, you also had a blessing of choices. You had What Is This? That had some interest from record labels. The Chili Peppers obviously had interest from record labels early on. Nowadays, you've got kids who are artists, some who are musicians, as I understand. It's a very different landscape now than when you made your bones.
Yeah, honestly, I could not navigate it now. I'm trying even with the solo career, and I see that it's difficult for me, in that respect to engage, and you can do posts, especially. It's very effective if you're willing to engage and convert. And I just, I come from a time where it's like, no, and I want to be 60 soon too. So it's not, for me, I want to put my music out there, and if it, whatever anyone can get from it is awesome. If you like it, it makes you feel good or takes you somewhere else, I think that's great. And ultimately I'm a drummer, really at heart. Give me a song and I'm going to play to it with the right person, but those opportunities change in time and, like with the landscape. And, I start to view it a little bit as like, wow, I am getting older. I see what's, there's a whole different way of how it would be done and could be done now, and a language to doing it and what might appeal to people. And my time was just like getting the record company interested in you, and if the record company got behind you and pushed the tune, and then you hit the road, and then they're the ones that, would help make you, you weren't so on your own to carve your niche and get something going, and then get the powers that be sort of, that can, get you to next levels and stuff, so, I get, listen, I'm old now, so it doesn't matter. So if my next life I'm young, and trying to figure it out, then I'll be young again.
Well, look, there's so many different parts of your career I'd love to touch on. I know we just have a limited amount of time here, so let me just jump around a bit. The Cocksock, how did that begin? What are your memories of that?
I remember it was we were doing a gig at a Kit Kat club. It was a stripper club. And I think it was the idea of just, doing something outrageous, right? It was just doing something outrageous to go along with the venue and, strippers and things like that, of that nature. I think really that's how it was done. And I think as, a boy growing up, we would make a lot of jokes about dreams. You have tons of dreams, like you're walking around high school naked or in your underwear, or something, like all of a sudden, so I think the sock came like that, like, whoa, well, that would be funny. We can't go out naked, right? And then the sock took on a life of its own because you had to be prepared. You definitely wanted to have a fresh sock with you. You didn't want to end a show sweaty sock, things like that. It took on its own life for a bit of time. Kind of funny, really.
Right. So you had to carry a supply of socks and rubber bands.
No, you just needed good elastic.
Oh, okay. There was no rubber band, no other support, just the sock.
Yes, a good elastic. Poor elastic, and you'd be in trouble. And I'll say this for you: with the Chili Peppers, with every man for himself. You know, the show would go on. You know, if your sock was going to come off, it was going to come off. That's your business.
Now, could you course correct? If the sock came off, could you put it back on, or you had to leave it off for the rest of the song?
Well, I was a drummer, so it didn't matter, right, in that sense. And I don't know if I ever had that. There were a couple funny moments. I have a couple funny moments of a crew member trying to help out somebody or other that's trying to play the song. You know, they could hide with an instrument, right? The instrument, you can dip that instrument a little lower, you know, and hide it. But a couple funny moments, certainly good for laughs at that time.
Any major controversies that arose from that? Pardon the pun?
No, a different time, you know. No, I mean, now, I mean, I don't know. Maybe me talking about it, someone might find something that's wrong with it. So I don't know.
Even in the very beginning, did you feel that spark of something special with the Chili Peppers?
I mean, the Chili Peppers always had a sense of trajectory from that first gig. Always, I saw it immediately. I know what it's like to be in bands that struggle. I know what it's like to be in bands that just can they just keep growing. It's something people really want. So Chili Peppers had that from day one. It was pretty obvious.
Well, I mean, it began with a friendship. It had that kind of core foundation. So I would imagine that, despite all the different challenges that have been in the band's time, they always had that core love for one another.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty. I mean, that's certainly for me, and it just as my life. I mean, I don't, we all don't see each other a lot, and that's all good. But, those years are all there always. You know what I mean? It's always there in sort of a love, camaraderie, especially it's the intimacy of doing this music, and trying to succeed in this world together and all the things that go on to get on that stage and get the job done, and until you're doing it and over again for years and years and years, you kind of don't know what that is. And and every musician, hopefully has that with their bands, but some bands are more, they don't have that same bond, we had to grow up.
I would say most don't. And that's what I always assumed was kind of that secret sauce, is that foundation. Right. I mean, you as well as the other Chili Peppers, have navigated your careers with seemingly minimal animosity, which is pretty rare in this industry with lots of egos and money and publishing and all sorts of that. Lots of eyes from outsiders. Right. That must be the secret to navigating the choppy waters successfully.
Yeah, I guess, someone else asked me that too, doing an interview, and that's interesting. I never thought that way. I just thought they were my friends. We all had this sort of fair understanding of what, how the bands worked, and I don't know, that's just carried over, I've not, we live our lives, we make our choices, but, I that's all I can say on that one, it's always seem right, and I've always loved my friends when I see them and participate with them again. I got a chance to open for the Chili Peppers doing my solo thing, and that was great to connect again and see everybody. And I don't know, I hear stories, but I'm just not, it's not the life that I live, so that's...
So one other career moment, and understanding we haven't even touched on Pearl Jam years here, but you were the intermediary between Jeff Ament and Stone when they were looking to form what became Pearl Jam, to Eddie Vedder. You connected the two together, yeah? Yeah. Now, tell me about...
Unintentional, just...
Well, it was intentional, as I understand. They were looking for someone.
Sort of a conjunction moment that we all look back on now, right? But was unintentional.
That demo exchange, that sequence, hey, my friend Eddie is, interested in this band. All of a sudden, he's moving to Seattle, and you're seeing this, this whole new genre start to grow up north. That must have been very, very interesting. How did you come to know Jeff and Stone early on?
The story is, really they sussed me out post Green River. They knew my work with the Chili Peppers, and they were looking for a drummer and a singer to start a new band. And they got in touch with me, and I remember meeting, I think I remember meeting Stone. I don't know if Jeff was there for the first initial meeting. I remember meeting Stone, and the thing was, hey, do you want to come and try to be in this band, in our new band? We'd love to. We think you'd be great for it. And we had to try it out and all that. But their whole life was in Seattle, and my whole life was in LA. My wife to be was to have our firstborn. This was August, so in April the following year. So she was pregnant. I was broke. I had tours booked with Red Cross. I had a full scheduled, of work for the next 3 or 4 months. And, so I was like, no, it's not realistic for me to go up to Seattle and start my life now. And so they asked me to, well, if you know anybody else, any other drummers or singers, please pass along the tape. And, so what is that, August? So the year before, or maybe 6 months before, at some point, I'm getting confused in the timing, but when I was on tour with Joe Strummer, I met Eddie down in San Diego at a gig in San Diego. And we just, for whatever reason, hit it off. You know what I mean? It's like I like you, you like me, let's hang out type of vibe. And so, we started getting to know each other a little bit, playing basketball together. And I had also met my wife to be literally the day before, or 2 days before I met Eddie on that same tour. So it all was all starting to circle around. So I started spending more time with her, some months later. And it's the same time that Eddie and I started hanging out. And so we had there was about 6 months of just hanging and being friends. And then, of course, I got to know that Eddie was a singer, and he had his local bands at the time. And I remember going to a party and, seeing him probably with Brad on drums. I think it was the same party, and it was a long time ago. And, all these guys went on to stellar careers. So I remember thinking, wow, he's a really good singer. Okay, cool. So when I got the tape, it was pretty easy. I just, I was like, Eddie, check out these guys, they're looking for a singer, see what you think. And that was really it. I mean, that was it. I actually gave him the tape. I went on tour with Red Cross. I remember calling home, and my wife says, Eddie just drove up to Seattle. He got moved by that tape and drove up to Seattle. And I was like, wow, cool. And, so what is that? That says is this 91? 91? It must be 90. When did 10 come out? 92?
Boy.
There's a 91. So one of those years. I'm going to look at my records. I only have the reissue. It says 92.
August 91.
Oh, it says 91. Okay. So, that's not, I need my glasses. So August of 91. So this was 90, so he was off in the fall of 90. I went on tour. He went up to Seattle, and, 91. And we know 10 came out, and that's that.
Now, you just mentioned looking in your stack of records. Do you have a stack of records? Are you
oh yeah,
I have a bit of a vinyl collector? Yeah.
I have some, not as much as I would like. I definitely fell to getting rid of vinyl for CDs in the 80s. Sadly to say that, but in my defense, I was trading in records and CDs just to get my rent covered back in those days. Of course, back in those days, you could cover your rent by doing that, and you could go over to Aaron's Records or Amoeba Records, whatever, and trade it in. I got a couple $100, honey, I'm home.
So the record company would say, hey, Jack, here's a box of new artists. Have fun. Enjoy this. And then you'd be, you'd take it straight over to the used shop.
Yeah. Well, a funny story about that. At some point, I think I was still living at my parents' house. I found a box of ZZ Top records that someone tossed. Like they were put it by their trash. It was like a box of promotional copies. It was like a bunch. And I was so stoked, and I definitely traded those in. And I'm sure I got myself Zeppelin and Kiss records at those days.
So you've kept a stash of your own, yeah? Do you still break out the turntable, or is it pretty much digital these days? Yeah.
Today this morning I was just listening to I think it's the most recent release from Promise of the Real. What the heck is the title? I love the sound of this record, and the drummer Anthony's a very good friend of mine. And I'm just so bad with titles. I'm going to walk over it to it, so I sound somewhat intelligent. It is, A Few Stars Apart. Yeah. That's a good sounding vinyl to me.
Right. Now, when it comes to your recordings, Dream of a Luminous Blue, you said that EP was around for a year or so before Koi Fish in Space, yeah? Was the vision always to kind of put them on both together on a long playing album?
No, I had I had released Dream of Luminous Blue just digitally. Around, I think I did it in April, of 2019, I believe. And so, I didn't know I was going to get a little deal going with ORG Music. It was actually Josh Klinghoffer that helped me, get that done. So, when I think Josh, he heard Koi Fish, he heard, that, and he really liked it and wanted to, help introduce me to ORG. So, at that point it was an EP, and I was like, well, I got this other EP, why not? So we can do it on one vinyl, not have a short vinyl. Right. And they liked the idea, and that's sort of how that came to be.
It seems to be a pretty good format because, we like long playing records. We like, we don't want to have to flip them as often as, if it's a short one, but it also helps you complete the thought. Side one is one kind of movement. Side two is another.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. I'm push. I have another double EP already done, and I think it will come out on ORG. It won't be this year, but we've had some positive talk about it, and we went back and forth a little bit on the concept of the double EP because it's a little confusing for some, but I agree with you on that, especially with my music. I agree that if the concept, if the process does seem to have this beginning and end, the mixes coincide, the mastering coincides, and all of a sudden, there's a certain sound to one, a certain sound to other, and a mood to having done it, and that's, I like that. So, I'm hoping to maybe next year there'll be another double EP.
And now with the pandemic hopefully looking to come to a close, does that change your current direction of just focusing on studio work? Do you think you'll be doing more live shows as well?
Well, doing my show live, well, I'll put it this way. It's just me by myself, drum set and computer. So, and I have visuals, which you mentioned you wanted to talk about the video. So, I have visuals. I bring that up because my daughter did the video. So, and my daughter has done a lot of videos for a lot of cool videos for, artists you're going to know. So,
and that video is for Epic Battle of the Elements.
Yeah. The Elements.
That is an amazing video. I absolutely love that. So awesome. Encouraging people to check that out on YouTube as well. But is playing live satisfying for you?
Yeah, I do enjoy it for sure. And I did really like I said, the Chili Peppers, I opened for them, I did almost 60 shows with them in 2017. And, it was a short set. I was the opener, but it always went pretty well. And there was a pretty good crowd most of the time and receptive of it, which honestly, I was a little surprised because of just the nature of drumming to visuals and music. I didn't know if that was going to fly, but people, like live music now, and that's great. That's part of the new world that's changed. That's actually cool. There's a lot, people enjoy seeing a lot of different things. So, so, I enjoyed it, it's just things have to come together right for me. You're not going to see me, headlining my own tour doing this and, or vanning it to, smaller venues across the country. It's just, there's too much work involved. And, touring is sort of a beast. Things have to come together right. So obviously if the Chili Peppers take me out and I get to travel with them, that was a beautiful thing. And it made my life so much easier to have, they extended their, the crew to help me and have me there. So it really, it's just I don't need to play arenas to do it, but I do need some help, and,
I'm not far from your age, and I can tell you, sleeping in a van is not an appealing thought.
Yeah, it would. I'm a little bit. I'm a little bit spoiled, and also older, and also sensitive. If I'm sensitive, but at this point in my life, I have to know myself and know what's better for me or not. So, but I love playing and performing. The answer is yeah, no doubt about it.
Just got to be in the right conditions, the right circumstances.
Yeah, it's got to be right. Touring is one of these things. When touring is wrong or difficult, and it's a large commitment, it's very hard. It definitely favors being young at that point.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jack, I really do appreciate the time you spent here with us today, talking records, talking history, talking music. And I want to make sure everyone knows about this album, Koi Fish in Space. It's a double EP, Koi Fish in Space plus Dream of Luminous Blue. Jack Irons. It's available from Org Music. I'll put links in this episode page to where you could order it directly. Of course, if you want to see what Jack's been up to, you can go to jackirons.com. Of course, there's all sorts of different information up there from his discography and his history, past releases, etc. And make sure to check out the video Epic Battle of the Elements. It is phenomenal. It really is. And very surprised and very pleased to hear that Jack's daughter had a part in that. So I'm keen to look over her other work as well. It really is a moving video. Jack, thanks so much for joining us here on the Vinyl Guide, and be well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, that was amazing. Mr. Jack Irons, ladies and gentlemen, an absolute tremendous guest. And by the way, you have to check out the video for Epic Battle of the Elements. I put the link in this episode page, and even get yourself a vinyl copy of Koi Fish in Space. Plus, if you enjoyed this interview, there's an extended version at patreon.com/vinylguide. And that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please share these episodes on your social media. Share them on Facebook, tweet them out on Twitter, put them out on Instagram, and even show your record buddy friends how to get The Vinyl Guide podcast on that smartphone of theirs. And if you got a bit more energy, you could always leave us a positive review on iTunes. Log in up there and give us 5 out of 5 or 10 out of 10 stars. Say something nice. That is always appreciated. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.